What the earth keeps buried is not always dead. Sometimes it's just waiting. It was supposed to be a simple landscaping project. A spring morning in Bend, Oregon, the kind of town where snowmelt still clings to the edge of rooflines, and the light comes in soft over the backs of the pines. Tyler Beckett had just moved in, a first-time homeowner, 34, recently engaged, eager to reshape the overgrown backyard into something livable. The house itself was older but solid. White wood siding, a creaky porch, and a backyard that had long been neglected, wild with ivy and packed-down earth. He didn't know anything about the people who lived there before. Didn't ask. The shovel hit plastic just after 9 a.m. At first, he thought it was a bag of trash soft, resistant, oddly shaped. But when he pulled the dirt back further, he realized the object inside was solid, rectangular. He reached in, hands muddy, and lifted it out. It was a digital camera, the kind you don't see anymore. Compact, silver, a model from the mid-2000s. The lens was cracked. The battery compartment was swollen from moisture, but it was still intact. And inside, wrapped tightly in a plastic grocery bag, sealed with 2 rubber bands, was a memory card. Tyler didn't think much of it. Not right away. He brought it inside, let it dry, slid the SD card into an old USB adapter he had in a drawer, and what he saw changed everything. There were photos, dozens, people he didn't know. A party, sometime in the past, judging by the clothes, the hairstyles, the quality of the images, probably from the late 2000s. Candles on a table, string lights in the yard, wine glasses, laughter, faces illuminated by flash. Then came the last few images. A woman late 20s, maybe smiling at the camera. Blue dress, curled hair. Her name, he'd learn later, was Lauren Holloway. And beside her, a man slightly older, scruffy, laughing, holding a bottle of beer. Jake Mercer. They looked happy, intimate, comfortable in the way only couples in love tend to be. But the final photo was different. Lauren's face, half lit, looking just off camera, like she's heard something, like she's about to turn around. And behind, barely visible in the dark, a shadow, a vague human shape. No face, no features, just presence. Tyler called the police. Within hours, the backyard was sealed off. Crime scene tape stretched between the garden beds and the fence line. A tent went up. Forensics arrived. The shed in the corner of the property was searched. Soil samples were taken. Ground-penetrating radar was requested. The reason? Lauren Holloway and Jake Mercer had disappeared 15 years earlier. From that exact address, after leaving a party hosted by the previous homeowner, they were never seen again. No one had heard from them since the 17th of July, 2010. No texts, no calls, no activity on credit cards, no car, no bodies, no evidence, just absence. And now, after a decade and a half, their faces were back. Unearthed, accidentally, and with them a piece of the story that had never been told. The memory card was extracted and cloned. Image metadata was recovered. The final photo, the one with the shadow, was time-stamped 3:14 a.m. That was nearly 4 hours after Lauren and Jake were last seen leaving the party. According to everyone there, they walked out around 11:15 p.m., said goodbye, got into their car. But if the timestamp was correct, they were still alive hours later, still on the property, still within reach of whoever took that final picture. Authorities declined to release the full contents of the card. But off-record, one forensic tech told a reporter it was the kind of thing that changes how you sleep. That's because if the camera was buried and the memory card was preserved, someone had wanted it to be found. Eventually, or maybe just not yet. The garden was dug out completely. No bodies were found. No bones. No blood. But under the soil where the camera had been, a thin layer of ash and newspaper pulp was recovered. Fragments of the Oregonian, dated the 19th of July, 2010, 2 days after the couple disappeared. Deliberate, layered, timed. The homeowner at the time, Heather Flynn, had sold the house in 2012. moved to Colorado, never mentioned the missing couple again. She had claimed they left her party that night in good spirits. She had no idea what happened to them. That's what she told police. That's what she told reporters. That's what she told herself. But now, the ground was telling a different story. The case was reopened. Files were pulled from archives. Old witnesses were called. And the town of Bend, Oregon, was about to remember something it had worked hard to forget. Because time doesn't bury the truth. People do. And sometimes, all it takes is a shovel in the right spot. And the past begins to breathe again. Some nights don't end. They just disappear. The 17th of July, 2010. A warm summer night in Bend, Oregon. The kind that clings to your skin even after sunset. The air was still and the moon hung low and full over the Cascade foothills. On Larkspur Drive, just 2 miles from downtown, music drifted through the neighborhood soft, pulsing, alive. A party was underway. Heather Flynn was known for her parties. She had inherited the house from her aunt the year before and turned it into a social nucleus for people who hovered somewhere between late 20s and early 30s young professionals, transplants, wanderers. Her backyard stretched deep behind the house, lined with string lights, folding chairs, and mismatched wine glasses. That night there were over 20 people gathered. Most of them would later say they didn't really know each other. But 2 people stood out, Lauren Holloway and Jake Mercer. They weren't from Bend originally. Moved up from Redding, California that spring. Jake had gotten a contract shooting videos for a travel blog. Lauren was freelancing as a graphic designer. They were new. In that way, new couples often are magnetic to others, quietly wrapped around each other in the corners of conversations. She wore a navy blue sundress. He had on a faded gray t-shirt and black sneakers. They brought a bottle of wine they couldn't pronounce. They laughed easily. Most people liked them. Photos taken that night recovered from the buried camera show them in snapshots. Lauren dancing barefoot on the patio, Jake holding a sparkler, both of them arm in arm with people whose names no one remembers now. In one, Lauren's head is tilted back in mid-laugh. In another, Jake is standing alone, staring off at something outside the frame. The last confirmed sighting of them was at 11:17 p.m. They had told Heather they were heading out. Jake had to be up early the next morning. Lauren seemed tired. A few guests remembered waving. One said he thought they walked toward their car. Another remembered hearing the engine start, but no one saw them leave the driveway. No one actually saw the car go, and no one saw them again. The next day, texts to Lauren went unanswered. Jake didn't show up to his filming location. By evening, Lauren's sister, who lived in Eugene, was calling hospitals. By the second day, Heather called the police. The initial response was limited. Adults disappear all the time, the officer said. Maybe they drove up the coast. Maybe they had a fight. Maybe they'd be back by Monday. But Monday came, and nothing changed. The house they were renting still had their things. Their cat hadn't been fed. Their car was gone. Their phones were off. There were no signs of forced entry, no notes, no flagged credit cards, no goodbyes. They had vanished. Detectives interviewed everyone who had attended the party. Most had left before midnight. Some were too intoxicated to remember specifics. Heather was calm, cooperative. She said she remembered Lauren and Jake saying goodbye. She didn't notice anything strange, didn't see them after that. There were no security cameras on Larkspur Drive. The nearest neighbor with a camera had one motion-activated light, but it didn't trigger that night. No traffic cams covered the intersection. The couple's car, a 2002 silver Honda Accord, was entered into the national database. It never turned up. A search was launched. Trails, lakes, back roads, helicopters, nothing. Theories spread fast. Some said they ran off together. Others whispered about Jake's former employer. Someone mentioned he'd had a falling out, though no one had details. A bartender at a local pub thought they saw Lauren a week later, but the sighting went nowhere. And then came the silence. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The party became a ghost in conversation. People moved away. Heather sold the house. No one else asked questions, not out loud. Until 15 years later, when the dirt gave way, and the camera told a different story. Not every disappearance makes a sound. Some just take the air with them. The 18th of July, 2010. The sun came up over Bend like it always did, low and yellow, stretching across the rooftops like it had nothing to answer for. The town moved on. Shops opened. Coffee brewed. Tourists filtered into the parks. But inside a two-bedroom rental on the edge of town, a phone was ringing. Again, and again, and again. Lauren Halloway wasn't answering. Neither was Jake Mercer. By the time Lauren's sister Caroline had called 6 times without a response, something felt wrong. She tried Jake's phone. Voicemail. She tried texting, no read receipts. No dots. No typing. Just silence. She called the apartment. Nothing. She drove 2.5 hours from Eugene that afternoon. Found the front door locked. Curtains drawn. Their car missing. The cat meowing inside, food bowl empty. Inside the house. Untouched laundry, cold coffee in the French press, a charging cable dangling off the edge of the nightstand. Nothing packed, nothing moved. It looked like a Sunday morning, except it wasn't. At 7:22 p.m., Caroline filed a missing persons report. The dispatcher took the details. 2 adults, romantic partners, lived together, attended a party 2 nights earlier, and hadn't been seen since. The officer who followed up asked if they'd had a fight recently. Had they ever run off before? Were they stressed? The usual questions. Caroline insisted this wasn't like them. Jake had a work obligation the next morning. Lauren had anxiety. She wouldn't go off the grid without telling anyone. But the case wasn't urgent. Not yet. Because in the state of Oregon, as in many other states, adults have the right to disappear. The police couldn't assume a crime. Not without evidence. Not without blood. Not without a body. Still, by Tuesday, the Bend Police Department assigned a detective. Detective Miriam Cross. She was known for being quiet, exact, obsessed with timelines. The kind of investigator who noticed not just what was said, but what was left out. Her first step was retracing the last confirmed hours. The party at Heather Flynn's house had started at 7 p.m. Witnesses placed Jake and Lauren arriving around 8. They mingled, ate, drank, and stayed until approximately 11:15 p.m. Multiple guests remembered them saying goodbye. Several thought they heard a car door slam. One thought he heard an engine. But no one could say definitively that they saw the vehicle leave the property. And no one, not a single person, remembered seeing them again. Heather Flynn said she went to bed at midnight. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything. She admitted to drinking. Admitted she wasn't checking on guests who lingered. Her memory of the night was sharp in some places, blurry in others. Detective Cross noted the inconsistency. But there was nothing actionable. The couple's car, a silver 2002 Honda Accord, had not been towed, impounded, ticketed, or spotted by any traffic camera in the Tri-County area. License plate searches came up empty. No ATM activity. No social media logins. No phone pings. It was like they had vanished, but without enough noise to disturb the air around them. Over the next 48 hours, Cross expanded the canvas. She checked with friends, co-workers, neighbors. No one had seen the couple since the party. Lauren had told a friend earlier in the week that she didn't really want to go, that she was tired, overwhelmed. Jake had insisted. He was always more social than she was. The day before the party, Lauren had picked up a prescription for migraines. Jake had dropped off his camera at a repair shop. Everything in their lives suggested they were planning for tomorrow. And yet, tomorrow never came. On the 21st of July, a formal search was initiated. Helicopters, drones, canines, volunteers. The woods north of town were combed, the riverbanks scanned. Still nothing. No tire tracks. No drag marks. No remains. Just a missing couple. And a house that went quiet right after they left it. Detective Cross dug deeper. Heather Flynn was interviewed a second time. She repeated her story, same timing, same goodbye, same memory of waving as they walked off down the gravel path toward the street. But she seemed distracted. Her answers shorter. Her tone clipped. Cross asked if she had security footage. Heather said no. Asked if she'd seen anything strange. Heather said no. Asked if she had searched her own backyard. Heather said she didn't think to. The yard had been cleaned the day after the party. Folding chairs stacked, string lights unplugged, no sign of disturbance, and that was that. Case notes from the time reflect frustration. A quiet one. The kind that settles over investigators when there's nothing to pursue, but everything feels wrong. Theories began to mount. The media suggested it was a lover's escape. Two people overwhelmed by modern life, deciding to disappear, start over. Others suggested something darker. A roadside abduction. A planned attack. A stalker no one had noticed. One anonymous tip came Einemann claiming to have seen a silver Honda near a rest stop on Route 58. That lead went nowhere. No cameras, no matching timeline, no proof. By August, the case had cooled. By October, it had frozen. Detective Cross visited the Halloway home one final time that year. She left behind 2 case files, one for Lauren, one for Jake, and a note to Carolyn. "I'm sorry we don't have answers yet, but I'm not done." When? She would retire 3 years later. Still not done. The files gathered dust. The story faded. But underneath it all, beneath the layers of official reports and newspaper archives and secondhand whispers, something had been left behind. Something with a shudder, and a memory, and dirt under its lens. Because what no one realized then, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that a part of that night had been captured, held, stored, and buried. And it was waiting. Not all evidence is found. Some is refused. The first place investigators always return to is the last place someone was seen. For Lauren Halloway and Jake Mercer, that place was 3417 Larkspur Drive, Ive Heather Flynn's backyard. When the Bend Police Department reopened the case in 2025, that address no longer belonged to Heather. It had changed hands twice. The property had been repainted, remodeled, and re-landscaped. But the earth? The earth kept its memories. And the evidence buried beneath it forced a second look at everything that had been dismissed 15 years earlier. In 2010, the original investigation had been orderly, procedural, and deeply limited. Heather Flynn had been cooperative. She was interviewed twice. Her story never changed. The couple said goodbye around 11:15 p.m. She stayed up a little longer cleaning, went to bed around midnight. She never saw them again. There was nothing unusual. At the time, there was no physical evidence suggesting otherwise. The backyard had been walked, photographed, briefly examined for signs of struggle. But without specific cause, no witnesses, no forensic alerts, no blood, the yard was never fully dug, never scanned, never treated like a crime scene. Detective Miriam Cross had wanted more, but she lacked the legal footing. Now, in 2025, the memory card changed everything. Not just because of what was on it, the photos, the final time-stamped video, but because of where it was found, under 2 feet of soil, behind the hydrangea bed, wrapped in plastic alongside decayed newspaper from the 19th of July, 2010. A deliberate burial. A timed burial. The question wasn't just who placed it there. It was, why wait this long to let it be found? When the digital files were restored, one thing stood out immediately to the cold case team. None of the media on the card had ever been posted, uploaded, or backed up. It was unique, unseen, untouched by public eyes. That meant the camera and whoever last held it kept the memory to themselves. Investigators revisited the original guest list. 23 attendees had signed the chalkboard guest list at Heather's kitchen entrance that night. Of those, 7 were no longer traceable. 4 had died. 2 refused to be interviewed. The rest gave familiar stories. Details blurred, timelines shifted. One woman, Miranda Locke, offered something new. She remembered Lauren seeming distracted during the party, like she wasn't comfortable, like she was keeping an eye on someone. When pressed, Miranda admitted she always felt Heather was watching Jake too closely, laughing too hard at his jokes, finding excuses to touch his shoulder. Detective Cross had noted the same, back in 2010, but it had seemed like gossip. Now, it was something more. They revisited Heather Flynn. She now lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, worked as a landscape designer. Still single, still soft-spoken. When detectives showed up at her door in May 2025, she didn't seem surprised, only tired. She agreed to talk. Yes, she remembered the party. Yes, she remembered Lauren and Jake. Yes, she heard they disappeared. No, she didn't know anything. No, she didn't bury a camera in her yard. But there was one pause. When shown the final photo, Lauren, half-lit, staring off camera, Heather blinked. Her breath caught. Her hand tightened on her knee. "You don't recognize this?" they asked. "No," she said. "I've never seen it before." But something in her voice had changed. Detectives noted it. Back in Oregon, the team did what should have been done 15 years earlier. They scanned the entire backyard. Underneath the northeast corner, they found what ground-penetrating radar called anomalous voids. Subtle disturbances, compacted earth, inconsistent layering. They dug. No bodies, no bonus. But beneath a crumbling slab of poured concrete, they found fragments of glass, a piece of cheap jewelry, and something else. A small square of cloth, once white, now stained gray. It tested positive for Lauren's DNA. Suddenly, the theory shifted. What if the camera hadn't been left behind to be found? What if it had been forgotten? Or worse, meant to be destroyed, and someone failed? Forensics dated the burial sometime between the 19th of July and 2010. 2 days after the disappearance, the same date the newspaper wrapping had been printed. The burial was organized, covered, hidden in plain sight, but not perfect, because memories, no matter how deep, don't decay the way people want them to. And now the camera had spoken, and the evidence that never existed had always been there, waiting. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Sometimes it just teaches them to wait. For 15 years, the house on Larkspur Drive stood quiet. Families moved in, moved out. Gardens were planted. Snow fell. Grass grew over what no one knew to question. The neighbors forgot. The street changed. And the only ones who remembered were those who had no choice. Lauren's parents moved back to California after 2 years. Jake's brother left the country. Caroline, Lauren's sister, stayed. Quietly, patiently. She never stopped calling the department on her sister's birthday. Every the 18th of July, like clockwork, she left a voicemail. Still here, still hoping. Detective Miriam Cross retired in 2013. She packed the Halloway Mercer case into 2 boxes and took them with her. Officially, she couldn't continue working on it. Unofficially, she never stopped. She kept a file labeled "If Found." Inside it, a list of questions, a map of the party, a hand-drawn sketch of the backyard, and a single photo of Lauren and Jake clipped to a yellow post. It note. "I don't believe they left," it read. Cross's gut had always told her the same thing. The couple never made it past the yard. But with no body, no blood, no witness, it was theory, not evidence. And theory wasn't enough to bring a warrant. The story slipped from headlines within weeks. No updates, no suspects, no reward. By 2015, most people had forgotten. But silence doesn't mean absence. It only means no one's talking. In 2020, a new homeowner moved into 3417 Larkspur Drive, Ive. A couple with a toddler. They remodeled the kitchen, pulled up the tile, repainted the back room. They never touched the yard. In 2024, Tyler Beckett purchased the property. The yard was overgrown. He made plans. He never knew it had been the last place Lauren and Jake were seen alive. The real estate listing said nothing. The disclosures listed no known incidents. But underneath that soil, a memory was waiting. When the camera was unearthed, when the SD card was read, when the timestamp confirmed that Lauren and Jake were still alive hours after they were believed to have left, the silence shattered, and everything that had been packed away came back. Detective Cross was called out of retirement. She sat with the photos, the videos, the location data. She closed her eyes and said, "I knew it." The footage wasn't clear. It was dark, handheld, sometimes tilted, but what it showed was enough. A clip just seconds long. Jake's voice, a flashlight beam, Lauren's laugh. Then a shift, the sound of something behind them, a pause, and a voice. Not theirs. "Where are you two going?" That's where it cut. Audio forensics cleaned the file. The voice was female, calm, possibly amused. They couldn't match it. But some on the team had their suspicions. The clip was time-stamped 3:14 a.m., 4 hours after Lauren and Jake were supposedly seen leaving. 3 hours after Heather said she'd gone to sleep. The silence hadn't been silence at all. It had been hiding. In 2010, the yard wasn't searched, the concrete slab wasn't drilled, the shed wasn't inspected, the soil wasn't scanned, because no one thought to question a farewell. Now they were questioning everything, because someone had spoken to Lauren and Jake in that final hour. Someone was there, and someone had tried very, very hard to make sure no one ever heard that voice again. It wasn't the scream that haunted them. It was the voice before it. The audio wasn't clean, not in the way digital forensics hoped. There was static wind, a low hum from an outdoor light. And then tucked into a corner of the frame, just before the camera tilted downward, Lauren's shoulder, a dark silhouette, and a voice. "Where are you two going?" Those 5 words became the center of the reopened case. A woman's voice, calm, neutral, slightly amused, as though she were observing rather than intervening. The cadence was relaxed, familiar, not hostile, but also not surprised. That tone bothered investigators the most. Whoever spoke wasn't discovering Lauren and Jake. She was expecting them. The timestamp was undeniable. 3:14 a.m. The location metadata, though degraded, placed the file within 30 feet of the northeast garden bed, the same place the memory card was buried. None of this matched the story Heather Flynn told in 2010. She had gone to bed by midnight. She hadn't seen the couple after 11:15 p.m. She heard nothing. But the voice? The voice wasn't asleep. The cold case unit brought in a forensic linguist. They analyzed tone, vowel cadence, intonation. The conclusion was cautious but clear. There was a high likelihood the voice matched Heather's speaking patterns from her original interviews. But likelihood wasn't proof. Detective Miriam Cross, now consulting in an unofficial capacity, listened to the tape 13 times. She sat alone in the evidence room on a Tuesday morning, watching the digital waveform jump and flicker. She had spent years staring at Heather Flynn's words on paper, and now she could hear them. "It's her," she said. She was there. The district attorney wasn't ready to file charges. Not yet. Not off a voice. Not after 15 years. So Cross did what she'd always done. She went back to the beginning. She pulled Heather's original interview, the one from the 20th of July, 2010. She watched it every second. The way Heather folded her hands in her lap. The way she looked away when she said she went to bed. The way she always referred to the couple in past tense, even before police had. They were so nice. They had such good energy. I thought they left. Not are. Not have. Were. A language slip. One of many. Cross dug deeper. She went through the old files. Emails, witness statements. One party guest, a woman named Rochelle Danner, had said something strange back then. It had been dismissed as irrelevant. Rochelle said she saw Heather standing at the edge of the yard at around 2:45 a.m., not speaking, just staring. It was dark. She could have been mistaken. But now, Rochelle's memory came back with clarity. Detectives brought her in again. She said, she looked like she was waiting for something. What could Heather have been waiting for? There was no mention of anyone else coming over that night. No other cars, no deliveries, no texts or calls from her phone. Unless they subpoenaed Heather's phone records again. This time, they applied new analysis cell tower triangulation that didn't exist back in 2010. And that's when something surfaced. Between 2:57 a.m. and 3:03 a.m., Heather's phone had pinged on the opposite side of her house near the side gate. That gate led to the back shed. The same shed now overgrown. The one no one had checked. A team secured a new search warrant. On the 4th of June, 2025, they returned to 3417 Larkspur Drive, Ive. The property had changed again. The yard was manicured, the flower beds carefully edged, but the shed still stood, weathered, peeling paint, a padlock. They cut it open. Inside, old gardening tools, a rusted wheelbarrow, 2 cracked storage bins, and a single plastic tub blue, sealed with duct tape. Inside that tub, a set of jumper cables, a roll of canvas drop cloth, 2 used sip teas, and a Polaroid. The photo was faint, faded from moisture, but visible, Lauren's face. Her eyes open, a look of confusion, fear. She was sitting on the ground. It looked like the corner of the yard. The timestamp on the back, in faint pen, 7 divided by 18 divided by 10, 4:06 a.m. The earth had held its secrets, but the camera had kept its receipts. That photo changed everything. Now they had visual proof Lauren had never left the yard, that she was still alive nearly 5 hours after her supposed goodbye. Heather was brought in. She didn't deny knowing the couple. She didn't deny hosting the party. She didn't deny being awake. But when asked about the shed, her hands trembled. "I never used it," she said. "I didn't even have the key." They showed her the photo. She looked at it. She said, "I don't remember that." Then she asked for a lawyer. Within 48 hours, a case was built. Circumstantial, yes, but now heavy with weight. The DA's office called the combination of the following unignorable: voice match probability, timestumpet video, location metadata, cell phone ping, Polaroid photo from inside a sealed shed, DNA found in the backyard. It was no longer theory, it was timeline. A secret timeline. One no one had been told. One the earth had kept, until it couldn't. And through it all, that voice, not angry, not frightened, just present, just watching. "Where are you two going?" That line would come to haunt the case. Because maybe the answer was nowhere. They never made it past her voice. They never left, because someone made sure they wouldn't. Heather Flynn's arrest didn't come with sirens. There was no chase, no dramatic confession, just a knock at her apartment door in Fort Collins, Colorado, and the quiet rustle of handcuffs. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She looked down once. Then never again. Inside the courtroom, Heather looked like a different person from the one who used to host summer parties in Bend, Oregon. Her hair was gray now, her shoulders stooped, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. But her eyes never blinked when they showed the evidence. The video, the audio, the Polaroid, the backyard map. The prosecution didn't embellish. They didn't need to. Their timeline was quiet and devastating. Lauren and Jake stayed after the party. There was tension, maybe jealousy, maybe obsession. They didn't leave, because they were never supposed to. Heather lured them back into the yard. A final drink, a question, a smile, maybe even a joke. And after that only Heather knew. There was no murder charge, not yet. There were no bodies, no witnesses, no confession. So the DA went with what they had: unlawful disposal of evidence, obstruction, concealment of a missing persons case. But what they also had was something else. Something that can carry more weight than a body. Intent. She buried the camera. She locked the shed. She buried not just objects, but time. She'd made a pact with herself, with silence, with the ground. In court, Caroline Halloway sat in the front row. 15 years of waiting marked her face like lines on a calendar. She never took her eyes off Heather. She never spoke. She didn't need to. The trial lasted 6 days. The defense argued everything was circumstantial, that the voice on the tape could have been anyone, that the camera might have been planted, that the Polaroid meant nothing, that no one truly knew what happened that night. But juries don't always look for certainty. They look for consistency, and Heather's story had too many cracks. On the 6th day, the verdict came, guilty on all counts. Heather Flynn was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Still, there were no graves, no bodies, no goodbyes. The backyard was excavated again. Cadaver dogs, ground radar, soil chemistry. They found disturbances. They found chemicals. But no Jake. And yet no one believed he had left. Detective Cross visited the yard one last time. She stood at the edge of the hydrangeas, and she said, "They're still here. She didn't move them, just buried them deeper." Some cases don't end with truth. They end with what truth refused to say. Because truth isn't always something you find. Sometimes it's something someone buries and just hopes you never come digging. Some places grow more than flowers. Some grow secrets. The soil didn't lie. On the 15th of July, 2025, almost exactly 15 years to the day Lauren Halloway and Jake Mercer vanish, investigators return to Larkspur Drive one final time. The backyard was quiet. Still, the house had new siding, the garden beds were manicured. But beneath that calm, the ground stirred. A forensic botany team had arrived from Eugene. They specialized in something the public rarely heard about. Phytoremediation pattern show plants grow over trauma. How the earth remembers what people try to erase. What they found beneath the hydrangeas wasn't a body, but it was a story. Root systems had bent unnaturally in one corner. The soil was looser, darker, and when excavated, it revealed fragments. Wood, plastic, hair, fabric, and bone. Not full skeletons, not intact, but unmistakable. A partial jawbone, a femur, pieces of rib. DNA would confirm what everyone already knew. The remains belonged to Lauren Halloway. Jake's were never found. The announcement hit the town like a siren. For 15 years people had whispered, wondered, rumored, but now it was real. The garden had remembered. Heather Flynn, serving an 18-year sentence for obstruction and concealment, was charged again, this time with second-degree murder. The trial would begin the following year. But this story wasn't about courtrooms anymore. It was about silence, and how silence is rarely empty. Because now, with new forensic mapping, a picture of that night had begun to form. Lauren and Jake had tried to leave. That part was true. They walked out the side gate around 11:20 p.m., intending to drive home. But someone stopped them. Heather told them to stay. Maybe she said it kindly. Maybe she begged. Maybe she threatened. We'll never know. But what we do know is this. They re-entered the backyard. Willingly, hesitantly, and only one of them would ever be found again. Detectives now believe Heather lured Jake into the shed. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, but inside one storage bin, luminol revealed a faint trace. A single smudge, too degraded to test. But enough to suggest something had happened. Lauren never left the garden. That's what the roots told them. Beneath the hydrangea bed, forensic biologists found what's known as a trauma bloom, an unnatural concentration of phosphorus and calcium in the soil, indicating decomposition. The shape was narrow, curled, like someone had been laid there, knees tucked, arms crossed. Buried quietly, deliberately, lovingly almost. Next to the site, buried deeper, was a rusted oxygen tank and a wheelchair. That's when a second story emerged. Because in 2004, Heather Flynn had a child. His name was Matthew. He was born with underdeveloped lungs, diagnosed with pulmonary hypoplasia. He used a wheelchair. He lived quietly with Heather and rarely left the house. In 2009, he died. Cause of death, accidental fall down the basement stairs. No foul play suspected. But now, 15 years later, his oxygen tank, his chair, and his toy blocks were found buried beside Lauren's remains. No one knew why. Was Heather burying two memories at once? Was the trauma too much to separate? Was Lauren's death an echo of another loss Heather never recovered from? Psychologists called it stacked grief, compounded trauma, but others called it something else entirely. Control. Because once Lauren and Jake tried to leave the party, something in Heather unraveled. Witnesses recalled she'd had too much wine, that she'd been watching Jake all night, that she laughed too loudly when he spoke. That she changed songs on the playlist every time Lauren walked away. Jealousy, obsession, possession. We don't know what exactly happened between 3 and 4 a.m., but at 4:06 a Polaroid was taken, and by dawn the backyard had grown quiet again. In the weeks after the discovery, memorials were held. Lauren's mother, now in her 70s, spoke at a candlelight vigil outside the community center. She held a photo of her daughter at age 8, smiling, freckled, holding a garden trowel. Jake's family asked for privacy. Detective Cross was asked to speak too. She kept it brief. Some cases don't give you justice. Some only give you names. Today we say hers out loud again. Lauren Halloway. A name returned to the light. The media moved on quickly. Another case, another story. But the house on Larkspur Drive still stood. It was purchased by a young couple in October 2025. They planted vegetables where the hydrangeas used to be. They never asked about what came before. But sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the soil is still damp, something flickers at the edge of the yard. A memory. A voice. "Where are you two going?" They never answered. And now the garden keeps that secret too.